Leave the office. Now. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look at me when he said it. We were standing beside the printer alcove on the 12th floor of the Peachtree Plaza, 55 Marietta Street Northwest, Atlanta, Georgia, the kind of narrow space where people linger too long pretending to fix paper jams so they don't have to go back to their desks. The printer hummed. Someone laughed somewhere near the sales bullpen. Phones rang. Outlook calendar reminders chimed in soft, familiar tones. It was 10:17 a.m. on a Wednesday. I had a status meeting in conference room 12B at 10:30. My laptop was open at my desk. I was halfway through reconciling vendor numbers for the quarterly forecast. Nothing about the day felt unusual. Why? I asked him. He shook his head once, barely noticeable. His badge swung slightly as he shifted his weight. The badge said Eric Morales, Operations Strategy. We'd worked in the same building for years, crossed paths in elevators, traded polite comments in meetings, complained about the same software upgrades. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't a gossip. He wasn't the kind of person who whispered warnings. You don't want to be here when it starts, he said, still not looking at me. Just go. Take the stairs. Don't wait for the elevator. What starts? I asked. That's when he finally met my eyes. He didn't answer. He stepped away, walked back toward the glass-walled offices lining the west side of the floor, and disappeared around the corner toward the executive wing. I stood there for a moment, the printer still humming, my phone vibrating in my hand with an email notification from finance-leadership at company.com about updated revenue assumptions. The subject line looked routine. Everything looked routine. I told myself Eric was overreacting, or messing with me, or passing along something half-heard. People did that here. Information traveled in fragments. A glance, a pause, a calendar invite that suddenly included more senior names than usual. I went back to my desk. The operations analytics department occupied most of the 12th floor. Rows of low gray cubicles broken up by glass conference rooms named after Midwestern rivers. My desk was near the windows, with a view of Peachtree Street and the Midtown Atlanta skyline stretching between the buildings. I could see cars and buses moving slowly below, people walking along sidewalks and stopping to take photos, the city doing what it always did. At 10:21, my manager, Sarah Whitfield, sent a Slack message. Can you come by my office for a quick check-in before the 12B meeting? Sarah's office was on the same floor, along the interior wall. Glass door. Frosted strip across the middle. She usually scheduled check-in stays in advance. She didn't do quick, unless something was already behind. I stood up, walked toward her office, and past Eric's empty desk on the way. His chair was gone. Not pushed in. Gone. At 10:23, my phone buzzed again. A calendar notification popped up for a meeting I hadn't seen before. Executive alignment, mandatory 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. location. Conference room 18A, 18th floor attendees. Names kept loading. VP of Operations, CFO, HR Director, Legal Counsel, my manager's manager. People who didn't attend alignment meetings. I wasn't on the invite. At 10:24, Sarah's office door was closed. I stopped walking. The floor felt quieter than it had a few minutes earlier. Not silent, just different. People were still typing, still talking, but the rhythm had shifted. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Chairs rolled back. A few people were standing. Phones pressed to their ears, backs turned. I thought of Eric's words again. Leave the office. Now. I looked at the stairwell sign at the end of the corridor. Stairwell C. Floors 1 to 25. Normally, everyone took the elevators unless the building fire alarm went off. The stairs were for emergencies or for people who wanted to feel virtuous after lunch. At 10:26, Sarah's door opened. She stepped out, saw me standing there, and paused. Can we talk later? She said quickly. Her voice was flat. I'm heading upstairs. About the 12B meeting? I asked. It's postponed, she said. I'll update you. She didn't invite me in. She didn't wait for a response. She walked past me toward the elevator bank, phone already pressed to her ear. I went back to my desk. At 10:28, an email went out company-wide. Subject: temporary schedule adjustments. Due to unforeseen internal matters, several meetings scheduled for today will be postponed or rescheduled. Please remain flexible and await further instructions from your department leadership. Unforeseen internal matters. At 10:29, Eric texted me. Did you leave yet? I stared at the message. I typed, then deleted, then typed again. No. What's going on? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I can't explain over text. Just trust me. Go. I looked around. The people nearest me were pretending not to look at each other. The sales director was walking fast toward the elevators. Someone from HR was already gone. I noticed desks emptying in a pattern that didn't make sense by department or seniority. I saved my work, shut my laptop, slid it into my bag. I stood up, walked past the cubicles, past the river-named conference rooms, past the elevator bank with its cluster of people waiting impatiently for cars that weren't arriving. I turned toward stairwell C. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I walked down 12 flights, the concrete steps echoing under my shoes, my phone vibrating with messages I didn't check. When I reached the ground floor lobby, I pushed through the heavy door and stepped into the cool air off Marietta Street. At 10:41 a.m., I was outside. I didn't understand why I'd been told to leave. Not yet. I only understood that staying would have put me in the middle of something I couldn't see clearly, something that had been building for a long time. And that was the part one didn't know yet. Because what unfolded over the next few hours and over the next few days didn't start that morning. It started years earlier. 3 years before that Wednesday, I had accepted the job at the same company without hesitation. The offer letter came in late January. Competitive salary, clear growth path, stable brand. The headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia, with satellite offices in Cleveland, Ohio, and Phoenix, Arizona. The role sat at the intersection of analytics and operations, the kind of position that made you visible without putting you directly in the line of fire. I started in early February, onboarding on the 12th floor of Peachtree Plaza, the same floor I would leave in a stairwell years later. The first year was exactly what it promised to be. Mornings started with coffee from Riverbend Cafe across the street, a narrow place with burnt espresso and decent bagels. I'd swipe my badge at the Peachtree Plaza lobby turnstiles, ride the elevator up with the same group of people every day, exchange nods, talk about weather, traffic, or the Bulls. The operations analytics department was busy but orderly. We had weekly forecast meetings in conference room 12B, monthly reviews in 12D, quarterly planning sessions upstairs on the 18th floor where the carpet was thicker and the chairs didn't squeak. Leadership talked a lot about alignment, about agility, about transparency. Emails were direct. Deadlines were firm but reasonable. When mistakes happened, they were corrected quietly. When numbers didn't line up, someone asked why, and the answer usually made sense. Eric sat 2 rows over from me. He worked in operations strategy, which meant he often saw plans before the rest of us did. He was calm, methodical, the kind of person who asked questions that slowed meetings down in a good way. Sarah became my manager 6 months after I started, promoted internally from another department. She was efficient. She didn't micromanage. She trusted the numbers I brought her, at least at first. The first small shift happened during the second year. It wasn't a big event. It didn't come with an announcement. It came as a request. Can you just adjust that assumption for now? Sarah said during a one-on-one in her office, glass door closed, city noise muted behind the windows. We'll revisit it next quarter. The assumption was about vendor delivery times. Our data showed consistent delays. Adjusting it would make the forecast look cleaner, less risk, less explanation required at the leadership level. Just for the deck, she added. not the underlying model. I did it. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't even uncommon. People adjusted assumptions all the time to reflect management expectations. That was part of the job. The next request came a few weeks later. "Can you hold off on flagging that variance?" she asked over Slack. "I want to talk it through with ops first." I waited. The variance stayed. Ops didn't follow up. The report went out with the variance buried in the appendix instead of the summary. By the end of that year, these requests had become routine. Nothing was ever phrased as a command. Nothing was explicitly wrong, but patterns were forming. Forecast decks started telling a smoother story than the raw data suggested. Issues were framed as temporary. Risks were labeled as monitoring items. People who raised concerns in meetings found themselves off future invites. Eric noticed too. "You ever feel like we're always explaining things after the fact now?" he asked me once in the elevator, somewhere between the 12th and the ground floor. "Explaining what?" I asked. "Why numbers don't match reality," he said. "But only once reality makes itself obvious." I shrugged. "That's corporate life." He didn't look convinced. The third year was when things accelerated. Leadership changed. A new VP of operations joined from outside the company. Smart, confident, aggressive about growth targets. He wanted faster timelines, leaner teams, cleaner narratives. Meetings multiplied. Calendar invites overlapped. Alignment sessions became weekly. Sarah started forwarding me emails late at night with notes like "need this adjusted before morning" or "let's reframe this for leadership." I complied, not because I was afraid, because the requests were incremental, because pushing back felt disproportionate to the ask, because everything still felt professional. By early March of the third year, people were tired. The office felt tighter. Conversations happened in corners. Doors closed more often. The 18th floor became busier. Executive meetings ran long. HR was present more than usual. One afternoon, I ran into Eric in the stairwell, both of us choosing not to wait for the elevators. "They're moving pieces around," he said quietly as we walked down together. "Roles, accountability, blame. For what?" I asked. He shook his head. "Depends who you ask." A week later, Sarah asked me to prepare 2 versions of the same report. "One for internal review," she said. "One for leadership." "What's the difference?" I asked. She hesitated. "Tone." I prepared both. The internal version included full variance explanations. The leadership version summarized outcomes and deferred details. When the leadership version went out, my name was on it. When questions came back about discrepancies weeks later, Sarah forwarded them to me. "Can you clarify?" she wrote. I clarified, carefully, factually, without pointing to earlier decisions about tone. By the time summer came, I was used to this rhythm. I didn't like it, but it wasn't chaotic. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, which is why the Wednesday morning Eric told me to leave didn't make sense at first. Because nothing about that day, at least on the surface, was different. The meetings were scheduled. The emails were written. The office was full. But somewhere between the 12th floor printer and the 18th floor conference room, something that had been held together for years was starting to shift. And people like Eric could see it coming. I just hadn't learned how to read the signs yet. When I stepped out onto Marietta Street that morning, I walked without a destination. I crossed the street, past Riverbend Cafe without going in, turned toward the river. At 10:52 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Another calendar notification. Department update required 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. location. Conference room 12D. This one included my name. I stopped walking. Whatever was happening upstairs, whatever had started before Eric whispered to me by the printer, hadn't finished yet. And I had just removed myself from the moment it began. I didn't know if that would protect me. I only knew that if I had stayed, I would have been in the room when the story changed. and not everyone would get to decide how they were written into it. I didn't go home. I didn't go back into the building either. I walked until the office towers thinned out and the sidewalks widened. Then I sat on a bench near the river and waited for my phone to tell me what I had just walked away from. It didn't say anything at first. At 11:06 a.m., I got an automated email confirming that the 10:30 status meeting had been officially removed from my calendar. No explanation, just a clean deletion. At 11:18, Sarah sent a Slack message. "Are you available later this afternoon?" I stared at it longer than necessary. "Yes," I replied. "I'm stepping out for a bit, but I'll be back." I didn't say where I was. At 11:41, an email from HR-communications at company.com hit my inbox. Subject: Leadership meeting in progress. Please note that senior leadership is currently in session. Response times may be delayed. That message went to everyone. It was neutral, reassuring, the kind of thing meant to stop speculation before it started. It didn't work. At 12:07 p.m., Eric called me. I didn't answer immediately. I waited until the phone stopped vibrating, then called him back. "Where are you?" he asked. "Outside," I said. "You told me to leave." There was a pause on the line. "Good," he said. "Stay out for now." "What's happening?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "They're rewriting the narrative." "About what?" "About the last 2 years." That was the first time anyone said it that plainly. I waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. "I can't talk long," he said. "Just, when you come back, keep your head down. And don't volunteer information." "Information about what?" I asked. "Anything," he said. "Especially things you didn't decide." The call ended. I sat there until the wind off the river got cold enough to push me back toward the building. I re-entered Peachtree Plaza just before 1:30 p.m., swiped my badge, rode the elevator up to the 12th floor. The office didn't look the same. Not physically. The desks were where they always were. The lighting hadn't changed. The river was still visible through the windows. But the energy had shifted. People were at their desks, but no one was talking. Slack messages replaced conversations. Heads were down. Screens were angled away from passersby. Sarah wasn't at her desk. Eric still wasn't there. At 1:47 p.m., a meeting room reservation popped up on the shared calendar. Conference room 12D, 2:30 p.m., reserved by HR. At 2:02 p.m., another email. Subject: Updated attendance required. All members of Operations Analytics are required to attend the 3 p.m. departmental update in Conference Room 12D. The phrasing had changed. Required. At 2:45 p.m., Sarah finally returned. She walked straight to her office and closed the door. I didn't message her. At 2:58 p.m., people began filing into 12D. Conference Room 12D was long and narrow, with a glass wall facing the interior corridor. The table fit 20 people if you squeezed. Today, every seat was filled. An HR representative I recognized but didn't know by name stood near the door. A legal counsel sat at the far end, flipping through a folder. Sarah sat 2 seats away from me, staring at the table. At exactly 3 p.m., the door closed. The HR representative started speaking. She talked about alignment, about accountability, about recent discrepancies in reporting processes. She didn't mention names at first. She talked about the importance of transparency and how recent reviews had surfaced inconsistencies between internal models and leadership-facing materials. She said the company was taking steps to ensure clarity going forward. Then she said something that made the room shift in their chairs. As part of this process, she said, we will be reviewing ownership of certain deliverables. Ownership. The legal counsel looked up. We want to be clear, the HR representative continued, that accountability follows authorship. I felt Sarah's gaze flick toward me, then away. A slide went up on the screen. It listed reports, forecast decks, quarterly summaries. My name appeared on more than half of them. I didn't react. I didn't look around. I knew exactly why my name was there. Because I had prepared them. Because my name had been left on them. Because the decisions about framing had happened in conversations that weren't documented. The HR representative continued. These materials were used in leadership decision-making, she said. We are asking for explanations regarding methodology and assumptions. Explanations. Questions began. Not from leadership. From HR. Why were certain risks downgraded? Why were variances deferred? Why did internal and external narratives diverge? Sarah answered some of them. I trusted my team, she said. I delegated. Delegated. The legal counsel made notes. I spoke when asked. I explained methodology. I referenced email approvals. I stayed factual. No one challenged my explanations, but no one defended them either. The meeting ended after 45 minutes. No conclusions. No next steps announced. Just a reminder that follow-up conversations would occur. People left quietly. Sarah asked me to stay back. When the room emptied, she closed the door. I need you to send me copies of all your working files from the last 18 months, she said. All of them. I asked. Yes, she said. By end of day. For what purpose? I asked. She didn't answer directly. Just in case, she said. I nodded. I didn't argue. At 4:12 p.m., Eric finally returned. He walked straight to his desk, sat down, and pulled up his email like nothing had happened. At 4:19 p.m., he sent me a Slack message. They're drawing lines, and they don't want theirs too close to the center. That night, I stayed late. I copied files, organized folders, labeled versions. I didn't delete anything. At 7:36 p.m., Sarah emailed me. Thank you. We'll talk tomorrow. I didn't reply. I went home. Over the next few weeks, the office settled into a new kind of quiet. Meetings resumed, but they were different, smaller, more selective. Calendar invites came with clearer agendas, fewer open discussions. People stopped using phrases like "we decided" and started using phrases like "I was asked to." Ownership was being redistributed in real time. Sarah stopped asking me to adjust assumptions. Instead, she forwarded requests from above. Leadership wants to understand this, she would write. Or, they're asking why this was framed this way. Every question went backward. Every explanation traced a line. Eric kept his distance. Not from me. From visibility. He declined meetings. Deferred decisions. Put everything in writing. One afternoon, we ran into each other in the parking garage beneath Peachtree Plaza. Level P3. Concrete pillars marked with faded yellow paint. They're looking for a clean story, he said quietly as we walked toward our cars. Clean stories don't like shared responsibility. What happens if they don't get one? I asked. They'll simplify it, he said, until it fits. By late summer, roles began to change. Not formally, quietly. Sarah was excluded from certain executive meetings. Another director started attending instead. Emails that used to come to Sarah now went directly to me, with her copied. I answered them carefully. I documented everything. In September, HR scheduled one-on-ones with half the department. Mine lasted 20 minutes. They asked about process, about approvals, about how decisions were made. I answered without speculation. They thanked me for my time. No feedback. By October, the tension eased. Not because things were resolved, because the narrative had settled. Leadership issued a statement about process improvements and lessons learned. No names, no admissions. The department was reorganized. A new layer of review was added. The people who had been most vocal early on were now quiet. The people who had kept their heads down were still there. Sarah stayed in her role, but her authority had changed. She asked more than she directed. Eric remained in operation strategy, but he rarely spoke in meetings unless asked directly. And me? I was still employed, still on the 12th floor, still preparing reports, But I understood now why Eric had whispered what he did that morning. Because the moment the story broke open, they needed people in the room. They needed witnesses. They needed names attached to decisions that had been shared until they weren't. Leaving the office, when I did meant I wasn't there when the first version of the narrative was spoken out loud. I wasn't quoted. I wasn't referenced. I entered the story later, when the edges had already been softened. It didn't make me safe, but it kept me from being central. 3 years of slow normalization had led to one morning of quiet urgency, and I had almost ignored it. By the time winter arrived, the office had learned how to move around the damage without touching it. No one talked about the Wednesday anymore. Not out loud. It had been reclassified as a process reset, a phrase that appeared in a single internal newsletter and then never again. People who joined after that month wouldn't know anything unusual had happened unless they paid attention to the silences. I did. The silences had patterns. Sarah stopped holding one-on-ones in her office and started booking conference room 12C instead, the smaller room with no glass walls. She always chose early mornings, before the floor filled up. She kept the door closed and the blinds down. Our conversations changed. Instead of asking for my perspective, she asked for confirmation. "Is this supported by documentation?" she would ask. "Can we point to an approval email?" Who else was copied? She never said why. She didn't have to. In January of the following year, a new director joined operations. His name was added to our org chart with no announcement. His calendar immediately filled with meetings that Sarah used to attend. At first, I thought he was there to help. By February, it was clear he was there to observe. He sat in on forecast reviews. He asked questions that sounded neutral but weren't. He requested follow-ups in writing. He didn't contradict anyone. He just took notes. One afternoon, after a particularly quiet meeting in conference room 12B, Eric caught up with me near the elevators. "They're still mapping," he said. "Mapping what?" I asked. "Who reacts how?" he said. "Who explains? Who deflects? Why?" I asked. He smiled without humor. Because if they ever need to simplify again, they'll already know where to draw the line. That was the moment I realized the chaos hadn't ended. It had just slowed down. The next inflection point came in early spring. I remember because the river outside the 12th floor windows had started to turn green again. Dyed for St. Patrick's Day, a detail that felt absurdly normal compared to what was happening inside. At 9:12 a.m. on a Tuesday, an email went out from operations-leadership@company.com. Subject: Documentation Standards Update. Effective immediately, all analytical outputs used in leadership decision-making must include documented approval trails. Approval trails. The email attached a template. It was long, detailed, burdensome. Every assumption required a sign-off. Every change required a timestamp. Every deck required an owner and a reviewer. On paper, it was good governance. In practice, it did something else. It froze initiative. People hesitated to make adjustments. They waited for approval that took days. Decisions slowed. And when something went wrong, the trail made it obvious who had touched what and when. I adapted. I documented everything. Every Slack conversation that mattered, I summarized in email. Every verbal agreement, I followed up with a confirmation. Sarah noticed. "Smart," she said once, quietly, as we walked out of a meeting together. "This is how things work now." It wasn't praise. It was instruction. By summer, the department had split into 2 groups. There were people who still believed in the old version of the job, the collaborative version, the one where you solved problems together and trusted that leadership would absorb complexity. And there were people who had adjusted. The second group wrote fewer words in meetings and more in emails. They volunteered less. They asked clarifying questions that sounded supportive but narrowed responsibility. I belonged to the second group, not because I wanted to, because I had seen what happened to people who stayed in the first. One analyst, newer than me, raised concerns in a meeting about unrealistic delivery timelines. She phrased it carefully, respectfully. The room went quiet. The director thanked her and moved on. 2 weeks later, she was reassigned to a different project, one with no visibility and no clear path back. No one said it was related. Everyone understood that it was. Sarah's position became more precarious. She was still my manager, but her influence had diminished. Decisions she used to make independently now required review. She grew more cautious. Sometimes she asked me for advice, not about the work, about how to phrase emails. "What's the least risky way to say this?" she asked once, handing me her laptop in her office. I read the draft. It was factual, reasonable. "It's fine," I said. She shook her head. "Not like this." We rewrote it together, adding qualifiers, references, neutral language. She sent it. The response came 2 days later. Approval with conditions. Sarah sighed when she read it. "I used to think good work spoke for itself," she said. I didn't respond. The warning Eric had given me that morning stayed with me. Not just the words, the timing. He hadn't said it when things were bad. He'd said it at the exact moment when the story was about to be told for the first time. That mattered. I asked him about it once, months later, when the office felt stable enough for quiet conversations again. We were in the stairwell, halfway between floors, taking the long way down after a late meeting. "How did you know?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "I saw the calendar invites," he said finally. "The order they went out. Who was included? Who wasn't? That's it." I asked. "And I heard how they were talking about clarity," he added. "Clarity is what people ask for when they want something simple enough to assign." He stopped on the landing, turned to look at me. "You weren't supposed to be simple," he said, "but you could have been made that way." I thought about that often after. The following fall, a subtle shift occurred. Sarah was removed from a project she had led for years. No explanation. The work was reassigned to another director. Her title didn't change. Her scope did. She didn't talk about it. I didn't ask. In October, HR sent out another company-wide email. Subject: Performance Review Framework Update. The framework emphasized individual accountability, metrics, deliverables, clear ownership. It rewarded clarity. It penalized ambiguity. I adjusted my goals accordingly. I narrowed my scope. I defined my responsibilities precisely. I stopped stepping in when things weren't clearly mine. This wasn't how I had worked before, but it was how people survived now. By the end of the year, the department was functioning again. Efficient, orderly. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. From the inside, everyone understood the rules. Stay in your lane, write everything down, avoid being the first voice in the room. I stayed, not because I felt loyal, because leaving would have meant admitting the chaos had won something for me, and because, in a quiet way, I was still useful. I knew how the system worked now. I knew where the edges were, and I knew how close I had come to being defined by a moment I didn't choose. The whispered warning had kept me out of the frame at the critical second. Everything after that was about learning how to remain slightly out of focus. The equilibrium held longer than I expected. Nearly a year passed without anything that felt like a rupture. The systems put in place after the reset did what they were designed to do. They slowed things down. They absorbed risk. They gave leadership distance from the details and gave the rest of us a script to follow. But systems like that don't prevent chaos. They just delay it. The next test didn't announce itself as a crisis. It arrived as a routine email on a Monday morning, sent at 8:04 a.m. from strategy-planning@company.com. Subject: Q3 Integration Readiness Review. Please prepare updated operational capacity assessments for review this Friday. I read it twice. Integration readiness meant something new was coming. Not a merger. Not yet, but a consolidation, a restructuring. something that would require departments to align faster than they were comfortable with. The email listed required contributors. My name was on it. So was Eric's. So were several people who hadn't been in the room during the last reset. At 9:10 a.m., Sarah messaged me. "Have you seen this?" "Yes," I replied. "We need to be careful," she wrote. That was all. We booked a working session for Tuesday morning in conference room 12C. No one else was invited. The door closed. The blinds went down. Sarah laid out the problem without embellishment. "They want a capacity story that supports acceleration," she said. "They don't want surprises." "And what does reality support?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. "Reality is complicated," she said finally, "and they don't have patience for that right now." I looked at the draft framework she'd pulled up on her laptop. It mirrored earlier ones. Clean, optimistic, flexible language. I recognized it. "This is how it starts," I said. Sarah nodded once. "I know," she said. "That's why I wanted you in here first." It wasn't a request to manipulate. It was an acknowledgement that the line was visible again. We worked through the numbers carefully. We didn't hide constraints. We contextualized them. We included scenarios. It was defensible. It wasn't flattering. When Eric joined us later that afternoon, he reviewed the deck silently. "This will trigger questions," he said. "That's the point," Sarah replied. He looked at me. "You ready for that?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. The questions came faster than expected. By Wednesday morning, our calendars were full. Pre-reads, clarifications, follow-ups. A senior director asked why our assumptions differed from those used in a parallel strategy deck. I explained. He asked if we could align. I said we could reconcile but not erase. The phrasing mattered. At 3:17 p.m., Sarah forwarded me an email from the VP of Operations. "We need a unified message by Friday." Underneath, Sarah had typed, "Thoughts?" I didn't answer right away. I pulled up the approval template that had become standard. I traced our assumptions back to their sources. I made sure every number was anchored. Then I replied, "We can unify around ranges, not commitments. Anything more specific would require revised inputs." Sarah responded a minute later. Agreed. That was the first time she'd written that without qualifiers in over a year. By Thursday afternoon, the pressure intensified. A new meeting appeared on our calendars. Executive Pre-Alignment, Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Conference Room, 18A. I recognized the name. Same room. Same time window. Different topic. The people invited were mostly the same two. I was on the list. Eric wasn't. Sarah was. When we arrived on the 18th floor that evening, the office was mostly empty. The lights dimmed automatically over unused desks. The hallway carpets muted our footsteps. Conference room 18A looked unchanged. Long table, screens at either end. The city visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. The VP of Operations started the meeting. He talked about urgency, about opportunity, about alignment. Then he pulled up a slide from a different deck. Numbers I hadn't prepared. Assumptions I didn't recognize. "This is what we're targeting," he said. "We need to know if operations can support this." He looked at me. "Based on your analysis," he added. I took a breath. "The ranges we provided don't support that level of acceleration without additional resources," I said. "If those assumptions are required, we need updated inputs." The room went quiet. Sarah didn't interrupt. The VP leaned back. "So you're saying no," he said. "I'm saying not as presented," I replied. "We outline conditions under which it could be feasible." He glanced at the legal counsel at the table, then back at me. "We don't have time for conditional narratives," he said. "We need confidence." I nodded. "Then the confidence would be directional, not precise," I said. "And it should be framed that way." The VP stared at me for a long moment. Then he moved on. The meeting ended without resolution. As we walked back toward the elevators, Sarah let out a breath she'd been holding. You didn't flinch, she said. I wasn't going to, I replied. She looked at me. That might matter, she said. Friday came. The integration readiness review went to leadership with our ranges intact. They weren't thrilled. They didn't reject it either. The outcome was ambiguous, which, in this company, was a form of survival. Over the next few weeks, decisions slowed again. Strategy revised its targets. Operations adjusted timelines. No announcement was made. No blame was assigned. But something else happened. The assumptions that had appeared in that executive meeting didn't reappear. The numbers aligned more closely with ours. Quietly, without acknowledgement, Eric noticed. They backed off, he said one morning in the elevator, without saying they did. That's fine, I said. He smiled. That's new, he said. The difference this time wasn't that chaos had been avoided. It was that it had been contained. 3 years earlier, the pressure had flowed downward and settled on the people closest to the work. This time it dispersed, because the boundaries were clearer, because the documentation existed, because the people in the room didn't rush to fill the silence. I stayed employed. Sarah stayed in her role. The department stayed intact. And yet, something about the warning Eric had given me felt even more relevant now than it had then, because I understood something I hadn't before. The danger wasn't in being wrong. It was in being early, in being present before the story was shaped, in being the first person whose words could be used to simplify something complex. The second time around, I stayed in the room, but I didn't rush to explain. Surviving the second pressure cycle changed how people looked at each other, not openly, not in ways that could be named, but in the small calibrations that happened before meetings, in who people copied on emails, and how long they waited before speaking. It created a hierarchy that didn't exist on the org chart. There were people who had been in the room during the reset, and people who hadn't. The first group moved carefully, spoke precisely, and rarely volunteered opinions unless asked directly. The second group still believed enthusiasm counted for something. I watched the gap widen. By the beginning of the next year, the company was outwardly stable. Revenue targets were being met. The integration effort moved forward in phases. Leadership presentations emphasized momentum and discipline. From the outside, Peachtree Plaza looked exactly the same. Inside, everyone was tired in a way that didn't show up on time-off calendars. Sarah's calendar was packed again, but the meetings were different. Shorter, more transactional, fewer brainstorming sessions, more updates. One morning, she stopped by my desk instead of messaging me. That alone was unusual. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. We walked to conference room 12C, the room that had become our default for conversations that didn't fit anywhere else. She didn't close the blinds this time. "I'm being asked to identify succession options," she said. "For your role?" I asked. "Yes," she said, "and for others." She watched my face carefully, as if measuring my reaction. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means they want flexibility," she said. "It also means they want to know who understands the system well enough to keep things predictable." Predictable. She didn't say the next part, but I understood it. They were identifying people who wouldn't destabilize the narrative if something changed again. "I put your name forward," she said. I didn't respond right away. Not because I was surprised, because I was aware of what that implied. "Why?" I asked. "You know how things work," she said, "and you don't force clarity where it doesn't exist." That wasn't a compliment. It was an assessment. "I don't want to move," I said carefully. She nodded. "I told them that." "Then why tell me?" I asked. "Because this is the part where people sometimes misread what's happening," she said. "And I didn't want you to." Misread. I thought of Eric's warning again. Of timing. Of presence. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "I know," she replied. "But I needed you to understand why certain doors might open that you shouldn't walk through." That was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. Around the same time, Eric started taking meetings again. Not many, but more than before. He spoke in strategy sessions, asked questions, pushed back occasionally, subtly. After one meeting, I asked him about it as we walked toward the elevators. "Why now?" I asked. "They've stabilized enough to tolerate friction again," he said. "For a while." "For a while," I repeated. He nodded. "There's a cycle to it," he said. "Expansion, compression, reset. We're between phases. Do you ever think about leaving?" I asked. He considered it. "Sometimes," he said. "But then I remember why staying matters." "To who?" I asked. "To the version of the story that doesn't get told," he said. That stayed with me. The cost of staying didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated. It showed up in how I prepared for meetings. I over-prepared, not out of anxiety, but out of habit. It showed up in how I spoke. I chose words that could be read back without distortion. It showed up in how I reacted to praise. I deflected it, redirecting credit. People noticed. A newer analyst once asked me how I managed to stay calm in tense meetings. "I don't," I said. "I just don't show it where it can be used." She didn't understand what I meant. I hoped she wouldn't need to. Midway through the year, a reorganization was announced. Not dramatic, not sudden. An email, a chart, a set of updated reporting lines. Sarah's role remained, but her scope shifted again. She gained oversight of a smaller team and lost influence over broader planning. She took it professionally. She didn't complain, but I saw the effect. She asked for input less. She delegated more. She focused on execution. One afternoon, as we wrapped up a meeting in conference room 12B, she lingered. "You're good at this," she said. "At what?" I asked. "At seeing where things are going," she said, "before they arrive." I shook my head. I just pay attention." "That's the difference now," she said. "Most people are too busy reacting." The department began losing people. Not layoffs, departures. People left for other roles, other companies, other reasons. They announced it cheerfully. Farewell emails. Cake in the break room. Each time, I noticed who replaced them. Often no one. Or someone junior. The work redistributed. Quietly. No one talked about burnout. It didn't fit the narrative. Late one afternoon, I found myself alone in the office. It was after 6. The lights had dimmed. The city outside was already dark. I sat at my desk and looked at the river. 3 years ago, I would have been the last person there because I was enthusiastic. Now I was there because I wanted to finish something before it became urgent. The difference mattered. I thought about the morning Eric told me to leave. About how close I had come to being swept into the first version of a story that didn't need my nuance. Staying had required a different kind of courage than leaving would have. Not bravery, restraint. The next pressure came not from above, but from the side. A peer from another department reached out to me one morning. "Can you help me understand something?" she asked over Slack. "Depends," I replied. She sent me a deck. It looked familiar. Too familiar. Assumptions I recognized. Framing I'd seen before. Numbers that weren't wrong, but weren't complete. "They're asking me to present this," she said. "I'm not comfortable with it." I studied the deck. "Who prepared it?" I asked. She hesitated. "Leadership input." That was the phrase. "Are you listed as the owner?" I asked. "Yes," she said. I closed the file. "You need to ask for written confirmation of the assumptions," I said. "And you need to ask who approved them." She paused. "They won't like that," she said. "I know," I replied. "But you don't want to like, what happens if you don't?" She thanked me. 2 weeks later, she was removed from the presentation. Another person delivered it. She wasn't punished. She was sidelined. She stopped messaging me after that. I didn't blame her. The cost of staying wasn't a single event. It was the accumulation of small choices that kept me employed and intact, but changed how I understood the job. I no longer believed the company operated on values. It operated on incentives. Values were what appeared in decks after incentives were satisfied. I stayed anyway, not because I thought it would change, but because I knew how to move within it now. By the end of that year, Sarah announced she was taking a leave of absence. Medical. Temporary. Planned. She told me in her office. Door closed, voice steady. I need distance, she said. Just for a bit. I understood. Take it, I said. When she left, an interim manager was assigned. He was efficient, polite, careful. He relied on me more than he admitted. I didn't take advantage of that. I didn't overstep. I didn't correct him in meetings. I supported him quietly. The department functioned, which I suspected was the point. Eric and I talked less, not because we didn't trust each other, because there was less to say. We both understood the system now. We had survived it once and then again. The third time wouldn't announce itself. It never did. The next ripple didn't come with a warning email or a leadership meeting. It came through a shared drive. I noticed it on a Thursday afternoon while looking for an older version of a capacity model. A folder had been renamed. Not incorrectly, just differently enough that it stood out. Q4. Acceleration, final, V3. The repetition told me more than the name itself. I opened it. Inside was a deck I hadn't seen before. It referenced assumptions that hadn't been discussed in our group. It pulled data from sources that existed, but not in the way the slide suggested. It wasn't fabricated. It was curated. The owner listed on the file wasn't someone senior. It was a manager from a parallel department. Someone competent. Someone relatively new. I closed the deck and didn't do anything for a few minutes. This was the kind of moment that used to create urgency. The instinct to flag, to escalate, to protect the integrity of the work. That instinct had cost people before. So instead I watched. By Friday morning, the deck had been accessed by several executives. I could see the view history. At 9:22 a.m., a meeting appeared on my calendar for the following Monday. Cross-functional review, conference room 18B. The owner of the deck was invited. So was I. So was legal. Eric wasn't. That detail mattered. The weekend passed without incident. By Monday morning, the deck had been updated again. Minor changes. Language softened. Assumptions reframed. Still no documentation. I arrived early. Conference room 18B was smaller than 18A. Fewer windows. Lower ceilings. It felt intentional. The manager who owned the deck arrived, looking prepared. Not nervous. Focused. The meeting started on time. The VP of Operations spoke first, framing the discussion as exploratory. The legal representative listened without expression. Then the deck went up. I recognized the pattern immediately. This wasn't about the numbers. It was about momentum. The manager walked through the slides confidently, pointing to growth opportunities, operational efficiencies, capacity unlocks. No one interrupted. When he finished, the VP nodded. This aligns with where we want to go, he said. We just need to make sure it's grounded. He turned to me. Thoughts? The room waited. I chose my words carefully. The structure is clear, I said. I have questions about the inputs used for slides 7 through 12. The manager looked at me, surprised but not defensive. Which inputs? He asked. The throughput assumptions, I said. Specifically, how constraints were normalized. He opened his mouth, then paused. They're based on historical averages, he said. Over what period? I asked. 2 years, he said. I nodded. And adjusted for? I asked. Process improvements, he said. Which ones? I asked. He hesitated. The VP leaned forward. This is what we're here for, he said. Let's clarify. The manager looked at his notes. Several initiatives, he said. Some still in progress. The legal representative finally spoke. Are those initiatives documented? She asked. The room shifted. The manager glanced at the VP. They're directionally agreed upon, he said. I stayed quiet. This wasn't my moment to explain. It was his moment to define. The VP, cleared his throat. "Let's follow up offline," he said. "We're aligned on the direction." The meeting ended without decisions, but something had changed. Later that afternoon, the manager messaged me. "Can we talk?" We met in conference room 12C. He looked frustrated, not angry. "I didn't expect that," he said. "I know," I replied. "They've been asking for acceleration," he said. I gave them what they wanted. "You gave them a version," I said. He frowned. "What should I have done?" he asked. I considered the question. "Asked who would own the assumptions," I said, "and who would explain them later." He sat back. "That's not how they framed it," he said. "I know," I replied. He didn't respond. A week later, he was reassigned to a different initiative. Not demoted, just moved. The deck stopped circulating. No announcement was made. The ripple moved outward. Strategy adjusted its language. Operations slowed its timelines. Leadership presentations emphasized optionality again. The system absorbed the shock, but not without cost. People noticed what had happened. Quietly, a junior analyst asked me if it was safer to avoid cross-functional projects. "It depends," I said, "on how comfortable you are explaining things twice." She didn't ask a follow-up. Sarah returned from leave in early spring. She looked rested, more distant. She scheduled a one-on-one with me on her first day back. Conference room 12C again. "I've been briefed," she said, "on what I missed." I nodded. "Anything I should know?" she asked. "Nothing new," I said. "Same patterns." She studied me for a moment. "You've changed," she said. "So have you," I replied. She smiled slightly. "They asked me if I was worried about you," she said. "Why?" I asked. "Because you've become careful," she said, "and they don't always trust that." I considered that. "Did you tell them you should be?" I asked. She didn't answer directly. "I told them you understand timing," she said. That was enough. The company announced another initiative that summer. Smaller, more controlled. This time, the assumptions were reviewed 3 layers deep before being shared. The meetings were shorter. The language was tighter. It worked. Not because the numbers were better, because fewer people were surprised later. One evening, Eric and I crossed paths in the lobby as we were both leaving. It had been weeks since we'd talked properly. "Still here," he said. "Still are you," I replied. He nodded. "They almost tripped again," he said. "Yes," I said. "But they didn't," he added. "No," I said. We walked out onto Marietta Street together. The city felt the same as it always had. Traffic, lights, movement. "You know what the difference is now?" he asked. "What?" I said. "They don't rush to fill silence anymore," he said. "They wait to see who speaks." I thought about the manager with the deck, about the room waiting. "Silence has weight," I said. Eric smiled. "That's new too," he said. The misstep elsewhere in the company didn't become a scandal. It didn't trigger a reset. It became a reference point, unspoken but understood. Another example of how close things could get to unraveling and how quickly narratives tried to simplify. The lessons held. This time. But I understood something else now. The system wasn't learning because it wanted to. It was learning because enough people remembered what it cost not to. And memory in a place like this was fragile. The push for speed returned the way it always did. Not as a demand, as a suggestion. It started with language. Emails began using phrases like accelerated learning and compressed timelines. Decks emphasized first mover advantage. Meetings ended with reminders about competitive pressure. No one said we were moving too slowly. They said the market was moving faster. By then, the systems we had built were solid. Documentation existed. Approval chains were clear. Ownership was defined. But speed doesn't attack systems directly. It works around them. The first sign was a change in who asked the questions. Instead of senior leaders requesting clarity, middle managers started doing it for them. Can we simplify this for leadership? Is there a version that's more decisive? Do we really need all these caveats? The questions sounded reasonable. They always did. Sarah noticed it too. "They're trying to bypass friction," she said during a one-on-one. "Not remove it, just avoid it." "And does leadership know?" I asked. She shrugged. "Some do, some don't want to." That was the risk. When urgency filtered downward without accountability following it, the pressure landed on people like us. Again, the specific moment arrived in late summer. August, technically, the city still humid, the office half empty from staggered vacations. A calendar invite appeared on a Friday afternoon for the following Monday. Rapid response planning session, location, conference room, 12B duration, 90 minutes. The invite list was long, too long for a rapid session. I opened the pre-read. It was thin, high-level goals, aggressive milestones, minimal detail, no assumptions, no constraints. That alone told me what the meeting was supposed to produce. Momentum. At 9 a.m. Monday, conference room, 12B filled quickly. People stood along the walls. Sarah sat beside me. The meeting facilitator, a senior program manager known for getting things done, started immediately. "We're here to align on an executable plan," she said. "We don't need perfection. We need direction." Heads nodded. She walked through the goals, then turned to the room. "Where can we move faster?" she asked. Silence. Not the heavy kind, the tentative kind. Someone mentioned overlapping phases. Someone else suggested parallel work streams. Then she looked at me. "Based on prior analysis," she said, "what's the fastest credible path?" I understood the trap immediately. Fastest. Credible. Those two words didn't belong together without context. "The fastest path depends on what risks we're willing to absorb," I said. She smiled. "Of course. But directionally." I didn't answer right away. I scanned the room. I saw people waiting. Not listening. Waiting for a number. A timeline. Something they could write down. "If we compress validation," I said, "we can gain time. But it increases downstream correction." "That's acceptable," she said quickly. "We can adjust later." Sarah shifted beside me. I continued. "We'd need explicit agreement on where responsibility sits if assumptions change," I said. The facilitator waved it off gently. "We can sort that out as we go," she said. That was the moment. The familiar one. Where urgency tried to outrun structure. Where silence would be taken as consent. Where speaking too early would put a name on something that hadn't earned one yet. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I said one sentence. Then the plan should reflect that uncertainty explicitly. The facilitator paused. "What do you mean?" she asked. "I mean, if we're choosing speed over validation," I said, "the plan should say that. Clearly." The room went quiet. Not uncomfortable. Attentive. That was new. She looked at the slide on the screen. Then back at me. "Can you draft that language?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She nodded. "Good," she said. "Let's do that." The meeting moved on. The plan that came out of it wasn't perfect, but it wasn't dishonest. And more importantly, it didn't pretend certainty existed where it didn't. After the meeting, a few people lingered. One of them pulled me aside near the coffee station. "That could have gone differently," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "Why didn't it?" he asked. I considered the question. "Because enough people recognized the moment," I said, "even if they didn't know how to name it." He nodded. "I'm glad you spoke," he said. I didn't respond. Gratitude was nice, but it wasn't protection. The plan moved forward. Fast but marked. Leadership accepted it, not enthusiastically, but knowingly. They asked fewer follow-up questions later, because the caveats had already been written. That was the difference. The cost of speed was visible up front. No one could pretend otherwise. A week later, Sarah stopped by my desk. "They're starting to listen when you pause," she said. "That's not always good," I replied. She smiled faintly. "No, but it's better than when they didn't." The tension between caution and momentum didn't disappear. It never would. But something shifted. Restraint was no longer invisible. It had become a signal, not of resistance, of credibility. That was dangerous in its own way. People started deferring to me, asking for confirmation before speaking, waiting to see if I would object. I didn't like that. It put weight on silence again, a different kind. One afternoon, Eric mentioned it as we walked down the stairwell together. "You've become a reference point," he said. "I didn't ask for that," I replied. "No one ever does," he said. "That's why it matters." I stopped on the landing. "And if I get it wrong?" I asked. He looked at me. "Then the system will move on," he said, "just like it always does." That wasn't reassurance. It was reality. The speed push continued through the fall. Some things broke. Small things. They were fixed quickly. No one panicked. No narratives collapsed. The organization learned how to move faster without pretending it wasn't taking shortcuts. That was progress. Of a kind. One evening, long after most people had left, I found myself back at the printer alcove on the 12th floor. The same one. Different year. Different context. I stood there waiting for a document to finish printing and thought about how small the moment had been when Eric whispered to me. How easy it would have been to ignore. How everything that followed depended on timing more than intention. I collected the pages and walked back to my desk. The office was quiet. Not tense. Not calm. Alert. Which, in this place, was the closest thing to stability. I didn't think about that Wednesday morning for a long time. Not in a deliberate way. Not as a lesson or a turning point. It became one of those memories that sits in the background, quietly shaping how you move without announcing itself. The office kept going. New initiatives launched. Old ones ended. People rotated in and out. Titles changed. Reporting lines shifted. I stayed. Still on the 12th floor of Peachtree Plaza, 55 Marietta Street Northwest, Atlanta, Georgia. Still riding the same elevators. Still watching the river change color with the seasons. If someone had walked in fresh, they wouldn't have noticed anything unusual. That was the point. The final confirmation of how close things had come arrived without drama. It came as a casual comment. We were in conference room 12B, wrapping up a quarterly review. The meeting had gone well. The numbers held. The questions were manageable. As people packed up, one of the senior directors lingered near the door. "You know," he said to no one in particular, "if we'd handled that situation a few years ago differently, this place would look very different today." No one asked what he meant. No one needed to. He left. The room emptied. I sat there for a moment after everyone else had gone. Not because I was processing anything profound, because I was waiting for the room to feel neutral again. Later that afternoon, I ran into Eric near the elevators. He was holding a folder. I was carrying my laptop. Same choreography as always. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked suddenly. "Yes," I said. "Just not the way people think." He nodded. "I wasn't sure you'd listen," he admitted. "I almost didn't," I said. "That's what I was afraid of," he said. We stood there as the elevator doors opened and closed without us. "Why did you warn me?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "Because I'd already seen how the story was being framed," he said. "And you were about to be placed in the center of it without knowing." "And you?" I asked. He shrugged. I was already peripheral. I could afford to be. That was the clearest explanation I'd ever gotten. I never asked who exactly had been looking for someone to anchor that story. I never asked how close my name had come to being used differently. I didn't need to. I had seen enough to understand how it worked. The company didn't operate on villains and heroes. It operated on convenience, on timing, on whose words were available when someone needed a clean explanation. I stayed employed. That part mattered. Not because of loyalty or fear, because staying meant I could see the full arc. It meant I understood that chaos in professional environments rarely announces itself with shouting or dramatic exits. It arrives as alignment, as urgency, as reasonable requests that accumulate until someone has to own the outcome. That morning, Eric had seen the accumulation reach its tipping point. I had almost been there when it did. There were no apologies, no acknowledgments, no moments of closure. The organization moved on because that was what it was built to do. People learned. Some adapted. Some left. The story that survived was the one that could be told without too many names attached. I remained slightly out of focus. By design. On a quiet evening, months later, I stood by the same printer alcove again. Different documents. Different context. The hum sounded the same. Someone laughed somewhere down the hall. Phones rang. Outlook reminders chimed. A normal day. I thought about how close everything had come to unraveling. How a single whispered sentence had changed my position in a story I hadn't known was being written. Not by moving me up, but by moving me out of the frame at exactly the right moment. I didn't become a leader. I didn't become a cautionary tale. I didn't leave. I stayed. And in staying, I learned something that still unsettles me. In places like this, survival isn't about being right. It's about knowing when not to be present. Sometimes, when someone asks me for advice about navigating pressure or politics, I don't give them a strategy. I don't talk about documentation or stakeholders or managing up. I ask them a different question. Do you know when to step out of the room? Most people don't understand why that matters. Until it does. Looking back now, I don't feel relieved. I feel aware. Aware of how close ordinary days come to becoming defining ones. Aware of how quietly careers can be reshaped without a single raised voice. Aware that the most important decisions in professional life are often made in moments that don't look like decisions at all. A whispered warning, a pause before speaking, a choice to leave when everything looks normal. I'm still at the same company, still doing the work, still watching the river. Nothing unraveled. That's the unsettling part. Everything almost did. Those are my thoughts. I'm curious what you think. If someone had whispered that to you, in the middle of a normal workday with no explanation, would you have listened? Or would you have stayed, believing nothing was wrong, right up until the story needed a name? Because that's usually when it's already too late.